There is something happening inside your body right now that nobody ever warned you about. Not your doctor, not your nutritionist, not the fitness influencer you've been following for years. There is a layer of fat buried deep inside your abdomen, completely invisible, impossible to pinch, hidden from every mirror. And it is actively working against you every single hour of every single day. It is squeezing your vital organs. It is flooding your bloodstream with toxic chemicals. It is quietly rewiring your hormones, distorting your hunger, clouding your thoughts, and accelerating the aging of tissues you can't even feel. The terrifying part is that most people carrying this fat have no idea it exists, no idea what it's doing, and no idea that the way they feel right now, the fatigue, the brain fog, the stubborn weight, the mood swings, may all trace back to this one silent biological enemy living rent-free inside their body. Scientists call it visceral fat, and for decades, researchers knew it was dangerous, but they couldn't fully explain why. They could see the correlations: higher rates of heart disease, diabetes, dementia, early death, but the exact chain of events happening at the molecular level remained frustratingly out of reach. Then, they finally cracked it open, and what they found didn't just answer the question. It completely rewrote how we understand human metabolism, hormones, brain function, and aging. Because the real story isn't just about what visceral fat does while it's there. The real story, the one that will change everything for you, is about what happens inside your body the moment this fat finally begins to dissolve. A sequence of biological events so interconnected, so profound, so sweeping in its effects that researchers gave it a name: the metabolic reset. By the time you finish reading this, you will never look at belly fat the same way again. First, let's destroy the biggest myth about visceral fat that almost everyone believes. Visceral fat is not simply stored energy sitting passively in your abdomen, waiting to be burned during your next workout. That idea is completely wrong, and believing it is one of the reasons so many people fail to grasp the urgency of addressing it. Visceral fat is a metabolically active organ, one of the most aggressive biological actors in your entire body. It has its own dedicated blood supply, its own nerve connections, and its own signaling capacity. Every single hour, it secretes a cocktail of inflammatory chemicals, hormonal disruptors, and toxic proteins that travel through your bloodstream and interfere with virtually every organ they touch. It is not a passive storage unit. It is a factory, one that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, producing nothing useful but pumping damaging output into your system without pause. This factory is wrapped tightly around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, and your kidneys, embedded in the most critical real estate in your entire abdomen. And here is what makes it so uniquely destructive compared to the soft fat you can see and touch beneath your skin. Because of its location and its dense network of blood vessels and nerve endings, visceral fat is in direct, constant communication with your hormonal and immune systems. It degrades insulin receptors in your muscle cells. It triggers your immune system to stay in a state of chronic activation, burning energy and generating inflammation that your body was never designed to sustain. It sends disruptive signals across the blood-brain barrier and interferes with the very neurotransmitters that control your mood, your motivation, and your cognitive sharpness. And it quietly damages the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels, setting the stage for cardiovascular disease long before any symptoms appear on the surface. Now here is the question that scientists spent years trying to answer, and the answer that changed everything. What actually happens when this factory shuts down? What is the biological sequence that unfolds the moment visceral fat finally starts breaking apart? It begins not with exercise, not with diet alone, but with a shift in your internal chemistry. When caloric intake decreases, when fasting periods lengthen, when physical activity increases consistently, or when chronic stress hormones finally begin to stabilize, your hormonal environment changes in a way that sends an unmistakable signal throughout your body. Insulin levels drop. Glucagon rises. Catecholamines like epinephrine and norepinephrine surge into the bloodstream. These are mobilization signals, the body's chemical command to begin releasing stored energy. And visceral fat, because of how richly it is supplied with blood vessels and nerve endings, receives these signals first and responds faster than any other fat deposit in your body. Those catecholamines bind to receptors on the surface of visceral fat cells and activate an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. Think of this enzyme as the master key to your fat stores. Once activated, it begins dismantling the triglycerides packed inside your fat cells, breaking them apart into free fatty acids and glycerol, and releasing them directly into your bloodstream. This is the ignition point. Not a slow warm-up, not a gradual shift, a chemical ignition that triggers one of the most complex and beautiful sequences in human biology. And the speed at which this happens may genuinely surprise you. Research published in leading metabolism journals has confirmed that visceral fat is mobilized at rates up to 3 times faster than the subcutaneous fat sitting under your skin during periods of caloric deficit or metabolic stress. 3 times faster. Which means that when your body finally gets the right signals, visceral fat doesn't retreat slowly, it retreats rapidly. The moment those fatty acids flood into your bloodstream, your body transforms into a high-traffic, biological communication network, unlike anything you've ever imagined, happening silently inside you. These fatty acids are not just fuel. They are also signaling molecules, molecular messengers, that tell every major organ in your body that a profound metabolic shift is now underway. Your skeletal muscles detect the surge of available fatty acids and immediately begin upregulating the genes involved in fat oxidation, essentially building more fat-burning machinery at the cellular level in real time. Your heart muscle, which preferentially burns fat for fuel under normal conditions, senses the increase and adjusts its energy intake accordingly. Your pancreas detects the change in blood chemistry and modulates insulin output to match the new metabolic environment. Your liver, receiving a concentrated flood through the portal circulation, begins reconfiguring its metabolic priorities entirely. Every major organ is simultaneously recalibrating, not one at a time, but all at once, in a symphony of biological coordination that you will feel almost none of consciously. The organ that bears the most immediate and dramatic impact of this transformation is your liver, and understanding why requires one piece of anatomy that most people have never heard of. Visceral fat doesn't drain its contents into your general circulation the way most tissues do. It drains through the portal circulation, a dedicated network of blood vessels that carries blood from your abdominal organs directly into the liver before it reaches anywhere else in the body. This means your liver receives a concentrated, undiluted surge of newly released fatty acids first, before your heart, before your brain, before your muscles. In the early stages of serious visceral fat loss, this creates what researchers call hepatic lipid flux, a flood of raw material arriving at the liver faster than its existing processing machinery can comfortably handle. It is like a factory receiving 3 times its normal delivery of raw materials overnight, with no warning and no additional staff. But here is where human biology does something that is, frankly, extraordinary. Faced with this sudden metabolic demand, your liver doesn't simply struggle and cope. It adapts, rapidly and permanently. Mitochondrial density inside liver cells increases, meaning the liver physically builds more power, generating infrastructure to handle the increased load. Enzymes involved in beta oxidation, the biochemical pathway responsible for converting fatty acids into usable cellular energy, become more abundant and more active within weeks. A liver that was previously overburdened, inflamed, and operating under constant metabolic stress transforms into a finely tuned, high-efficiency metabolic processor. Liver enzyme markers that had been chronically elevated, silent indicators of years of internal stress, begin normalizing. The liver's ability to regulate blood sugar sharpens. Its cholesterol management becomes more precise. Its insulin sensitivity improves so significantly that this single change alone has been shown to measurably reduce the risk of developing fatty liver disease, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. One organ, rebuilt at the cellular level, because one type of fat started dissolving. But the liver's transformation, as remarkable as it is only the opening act of something far larger. Because the most far-reaching and systemic consequence of visceral fat breaking down is the gradual, powerful end of chronic inflammation. And this change touches every single tissue in your body simultaneously. Visceral fat, at its core, is an inflammatory engine. It constantly releases pro-inflammatory molecules, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, C-reactive protein precursors that keep your immune system locked in a state of perpetual low-grade activation. Researchers have given this condition a name, meta-inflammation, and it is now understood to be one of the root biological drivers not just of metabolic disease, but of cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, accelerated aging, and certain cancers. You have almost certainly felt its effects without ever being able to name them. The exhaustion that sleep never seems to fully fix, the joint aches with no clear injury, the afternoon fog, the irritability that rises without any obvious cause. When visceral fat begins dissolving, the relief from this inflammation doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves, like a tide very slowly pulling back from a shoreline that it has flooded for years. First, the constant influx of new inflammatory signals stops. Your immune cells, which had been chronically overactivated and running hot, begin standing down from their state of alert. White blood cell counts normalize. C-reactive protein levels fall measurably in blood panels. Interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha decline. Then, the anti-inflammatory response begins to emerge. A hormone called adiponectin, which is paradoxically suppressed by excess fat despite being secreted by fat tissue, begins to rise. In some studies, adiponectin levels double or even triple as visceral fat decreases. This hormone plays a critical role in enhancing insulin sensitivity, reducing vascular inflammation, and improving the body's ability to oxidize fat in both muscle and liver tissue. The internal environment shifts from hostile to hospitable, from chaos to coordination, and every organ in your body feels the difference. Here is something that almost nobody discusses when talking about fat loss, and it will change the way you think about what visceral fat has been doing to you. Fat tissue doesn't just store triglycerides. Visceral fat also sequesters environmental toxins, pesticide residues, pharmaceutical metabolites, heavy metals, and fat-soluble compounds that your body couldn't fully process or eliminate when they first entered your system. Unable to deal with them efficiently, your body did the only thing it could. It locked them away inside fat tissue, where they cause less immediate disruption but accumulate silently over time. Some of these compounds have been stored for years, possibly decades, waiting for the day your body finally has the capacity to deal with them. When visceral fat dissolves, that day arrives. As fat cells release their stored triglycerides, they also release these sequestered substances back into circulation. Your detoxification systems are suddenly asked to handle a backlog of stored compounds in addition to normal daily metabolic waste. Your liver ramps up its phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification pathways. Your kidneys work harder to filter and excrete water-soluble metabolites. Your lymphatic system accelerates its activity, helping move cellular waste products toward elimination. Your colon becomes a critical exit route, as many of these compounds are ultimately cleared via bile and stool. During this phase, some people notice subtle shifts in energy, minor changes in digestion, brief alterations in mood, or slight skin changes. These are not warning signs. They are confirmation signs, evidence that your body is doing exactly what it was designed to do, clearing out a biological backlog that has been quietly weighing on your system for far longer than you realized. One of the most valuable and least understood gifts that visceral fat loss delivers is the return of something called metabolic flexibility, and until you understand what it means, you won't fully grasp why losing this fat changes the way your entire body functions day to day. Metabolic flexibility is simply your body's ability to smoothly switch between burning glucose and burning fat, depending on what fuel is available and what your activity demands require. In a metabolically flexible person, this transition is seamless and automatic. Energy stays stable across the day. Hunger is predictable and proportional. Mental clarity doesn't depend on when you last ate, but when visceral fat is abundant and inflammation is running high, your cells progressively lose this ability. They become locked into glucose dependency, constantly craving carbohydrates, unable to tap efficiently into stored fat, prone to energy crashes when blood sugar dips, and increasingly resistant to the hormonal signals that would normally trigger fat burning. This is not a character flaw or a willpower deficit. It is a physiological impairment. And when visceral fat decreases and inflammation recedes, this flexibility returns with a speed that surprises most people. Insulin receptors become more sensitive, improving glucose absorption and dramatically reducing the insulin spikes that trigger fat storage. Mitochondria, the tiny organelles inside every one of your cells responsible for generating ATP, your body's universal energy currency, begin operating with significantly greater efficiency. They extract more energy from less fuel, generate fewer oxidative byproducts, and create less cellular stress in the process. The practical result is unmistakable in daily life. Energy levels stabilize across the entire day. The familiar afternoon crash softens and then disappears. Cravings for sugar and refined carbohydrates diminish, not because of discipline, but because your body's actual fuel chemistry has stabilized and it no longer needs the quick fix. Your brain is perhaps the organ most quietly devastated by what visceral fat has been doing, and most profoundly transformed by its loss. The brain accounts for roughly 2% of your body weight, but consumes approximately 20% of your total energy. It is extraordinarily sensitive to both fuel stability and inflammatory status. The inflammatory molecules produced by visceral fat cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere directly with neurotransmitter synthesis, suppress the birth of new brain cells, impair synaptic plasticity, and create oxidative stress throughout neural tissue. Meanwhile, the blood sugar instability that visceral fat promotes creates erratic glucose fluctuations that directly undermine the brain's energy supply. The result is the experience that millions of people describe and accept as normal: the brain fog, the difficulty sustaining focus, the decision fatigue, the mental slowness that creeps in before midday and never fully lifts. What makes this so insidious is how gradually it develops. It doesn't announce itself. It simply accumulates, month after month, year after year, until people accept it as an inevitable part of aging. It is not. When visceral fat dissolves and systemic inflammation retreats, the brain receives something it may not have had in years: metabolic stability and a clean neural environment. The cognitive improvements that follow often genuinely surprise people who experience them. Mental clarity arrives first, typically within weeks. Focus becomes easier to sustain and feels far less effortful than it used to. Decision-making speeds up and stops feeling draining. Tasks that previously triggered resistance and procrastination begin to feel manageable and even satisfying. Emotional regulation softens. The irritability and reactivity that accompanies chronic metabolic stress gradually becomes a calmer, more balanced baseline. These are not subjective impressions. Studies measuring the relationship between visceral fat levels, inflammatory markers, and cognitive performance have documented real, measurable improvements in executive function, working memory, and processing speed. Your brain wasn't failing you. It was starved of the stability it needed. Give it that stability, and it comes back stronger than you expected. Then there is one more transformation that most people never anticipate. One that reaches into the deepest corners of your biology and reshapes something you interact with every single day without knowing it. The 40 trillion microorganisms living in your intestinal tract, your gut microbiome, have been suffering silently under the chronic inflammation produced by visceral fat for years. The altered pH of your intestinal environment, the damaged lining of your gut wall, the disrupted mucus layer, all of it creates conditions where harmful bacterial species thrive and beneficial ones struggle. The delicate microbial ecosystem that governs your digestion, your immune response, your mood, and even your sleep quality becomes progressively destabilized, and most people never connect their gut symptoms to this deeper metabolic cause. As visceral fat dissolves and inflammation decreases, the intestinal environment transforms. Beneficial species like bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, and akkermansia finally have the calm, hospitable conditions they need to flourish. These bacteria produce butyrate and other short-chain fatty acids that nourish the intestinal lining, reinforce the gut barrier, and regulate gene expression in ways that support metabolic health across your entire system. But their influence doesn't stop at the intestinal wall. Through the gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication highway connecting your intestinal nervous system to your central nervous system via the vagus nerve, a restored microbiome sends fundamentally different signals to your brain. Serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, the neurotransmitters that govern mood, motivation, stress tolerance, and sleep, are all influenced profoundly by gut microbial health. Better microbial balance translates directly to better mood stability, better stress resilience, better sleep quality, and a better emotional baseline day to day. Many people who reduce visceral fat significantly report that digestive issues they had quietly accepted as simply part of their life, the bloating, the irregularity, the low-grade abdominal discomfort, simply resolved, without them specifically targeting those symptoms at all. They didn't treat their gut. They dissolved the inflammation that was driving the imbalance. What all of this adds up to is something far bigger than a number on a scale or a change in waist size. It is a comprehensive biological reinvention, a cascade of transformations so interconnected that pulling on one thread causes the entire fabric of your metabolism to reorganize itself. Inflammation declines. Your liver optimizes. Metabolic flexibility returns. Hormones recalibrate. Your brain clears. Your gut heals. Adiponectin rises and stays elevated, supporting continued fat oxidation. Leptin sensitivity is restored so that your brain now accurately reads your body's energy status and regulates your hunger based on actual physiological need rather than inflammatory noise. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, settles into predictable rhythms aligned with real energy requirements rather than erratic spikes driven by blood sugar crashes and hormonal chaos. Your body and your intentions stop fighting each other. They begin, perhaps for the first time in years, moving in exactly the same direction. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all is the one that happens not in your bloodstream, or your liver, or your gut, but in the way you understand yourself. When you truly grasp what visceral fat has been doing inside your body, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived biological reality, something fundamental changes in how you make decisions. You stop acting out of guilt or vanity, or the exhausting grind of willpower. You start acting from genuine understanding. Every choice about food, sleep, movement, and stress stops being a battle and becomes a conversation with your own biology, one where you finally know enough to participate. The science is clear. The cascade is real. The transformation is available. And it begins the moment you create the internal conditions that give your body permission to let go.